So I used to teach, and therefore we're going to start with a bit of a reflective activity where you're going to get engaged. So we're going to start with, can you just think through, please, on the next slide. I should have got a clicker. What would your ideal community look like? Thanks, Sam. What would your ideal community look like? So what does community mean? And what makes a community a healthy community? And we're just going to have like a couple of minutes. You can talk to the person next to you, or you can do it in your own head. I'm not going to force you. There's some bits of paper coming around, so maybe just bullet point, like 2 or 3 words, whatever. Don't write an essay. But just a couple of things. What would an ideal community look like to you? And Phil's going to bring around some pens and paper. If you don't have anything, you can do something on. Pens. Do you want any pens? Pens. Sorry. Got a pen. So it's just a couple of points. What would an ideal community look like? Feel free to keep going as I start to tell you a bit about what I think about. So Phil and I obviously moved to Berensfield, and we feel a bit isolated out there at the moment because we've not managed to build the community. But I think part of that is because we had a really good community. So when I think of community, I think about West Oxford. I did a year of Bible college, so I spent time living in a house with lots of other people, and then from other houses also people came and we did college together, and we had really messy times. We had people staying in our bedrooms when they were coming to lectures. I climbed literally around the table over the sofas when we had one of our lecturers speaking because my cousin had phoned to say that she was getting married, and then we all celebrated together in a very messy way, and I had to climb back over. We got really annoyed at each other when we didn't do housework in quite the same way, or one of my housemates had so many things. I gave her a box, and after the box had everything put in it, she just carried the box around again for another couple of weeks, going, this box is great. We have different ways of doing things, and it was messy, and it didn't always work, but actually we built each other up, and they're the people that I think of when I think of community quite quickly. We looked after each other when we were poorly, we encouraged each other, we called each other out when we saw that they weren't necessarily doing the thing that was the best for them. It's just one of those times when we were together, and it felt like community. And then I moved with one of the other girls in my course. We moved to Dean Court. We had a girls' house, and there was another girls' house down the road, and there were families around. And we would babysit, and we would do house group together. One of the Bible teachers would fall asleep during Bible study time. We would watch Band of Brothers or go on holiday together. There was a boys' house that moved in, and a certain Phil was in it. We did things together, and it didn't look perfect, a bit like my talk this morning is not going to be perfect because there's no time to do things perfectly. I really liked the line in the song just now, I know it's not much, but I've nothing else fit for a king. I think when we're called by God, who is perfect, we can feel like, I can't do it perfectly, so I'm not going to do it. Which is how I felt a bit when I was first asked to preach today. I was like, I don't have time to do it perfectly. My PowerPoint is not pretty. It doesn't sing and dance. But it's like community. We're called to do something, even if it doesn't look perfect. That's the kind of point. It's people. People aren't perfect. So hopefully you've got some bullet points down. We've got 3 main points. The first point today is that the community in Acts gathered. I'm starting in Acts 1, I'm not going through each chapter. My first point is that they gather. So at the end of the Gospels, the disciples prayed regularly. Women found the Jesus' empty tomb. They returned to tell the 11 disciples, so they're already gathered, and all the others, that's what it says. 2 people go off to go to Emmaus. Jesus meets with them, and then they come back to tell everyone else. They've gone out in a pair, but they've returned to the group. When they arrive, they find that people are in the upper room. Those present are Peter and John, James, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, James, son of Alphaeus, and Simon the Zealot, Judas of James, and the son of James. And they join together in prayer regularly. There's a community there. There's a meeting there that doesn't stop. And on the day of Pentecost, this is even before that, when we have Judas being replaced, there's 120 people there. Peter's gathered 120 people in order to replace the one person. There's a group, there's community, there's that sense of we should be together, even though things are not looking necessarily how we expected at this point. They've had Jesus come back and then go away again. They must be a bit confused. But they are gathering together. When I was looking out the garden this morning, there were some starlings in the garden, which is quite common. And they'll often be around. They're like never on their own. But when they fly, they do that thing where they're all watching, like going around together. They're not watching the whole group. They're watching just a couple or like 2 or 3 others at different distances. I looked it up. They've got a sample of people in their community, birds in their community that they're watching to help guide them and go the right way. And I just thought that's a bit like this. Like there's times when there's just a couple of them. There's times when they're all moving together, but they're keeping an eye on just a few because we can't manage everyone, but we do need those specific relationships. So they gather in one place. When we have Acts 2, they talk a lot about being in community. The really key part at the end is when they have the fellowship of believers. And the fellowship devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone who was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favour of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. So they've had Pentecost, they've all been gathered together in one place. And now they are gathering still. This small bit of text offers 4 times that they are gathering together. They have the fellowship of all the believers together. Every day they're meeting in the temple courts. They're eating together in each other's homes. They are around each other constantly. They meet each day in the temple courts, which means Jesus taught that he came to fulfill the law of the Old Testament. So they're still going to the temple because it's still a place that they would go with Jesus. And so it's natural for them to keep doing that until they were kind of forced out. So they met publicly. This is what my Bible college would call their third place. You have your home, you have your work, and you have your third place, the social kind of place. The temple is their place of education. It's their school, or like for me, the school playground. It's the place where you just bump into people and meet them. It's the cafe, the coffee shop, the pub, whichever place you're going to, the sports activity. I don't do sports, game, whatever. They met as well in homes. So they're meeting in public and they're meeting in homes, obviously similar to our small groups or our house groups. I think also they're probably inviting each other into their homes for meals. Aside from like the bigger gatherings, it's probably a couple and a couple, or a family, a household, probably a household and a household. They're gathering together regularly, daily, they're eating together. Work can be a bit harder for us to try and gather with. We know they were fishing together sometimes, but I don't think they were fishing that much in Jerusalem. But it's their third place, their social place, the temple, where they meet and they worship together. So that's really important. They gathered, I'm going to say it again, in private and in public. They're not just meeting on a Sunday morning once a week or Saturday morning once a week. It's regularly, it's daily, and it's visible to everyone. They're inviting people of all languages after Pentecost. It's not just the people that they kind of associate and know best. It's everyone that's welcomed in. In Acts 6, we have another version of this. So we have the Hellenistic Jews, the Greek-speaking Jews, who are complaining that their widows are being overlooked in the distribution of food by the Hebraic Jews, so the more traditionally Jewish Jews. And as the commentary suggests, it may have just been a result of a language barrier. It might not have been really intentional. Whether or not it was intentional by some people, there's a clear decision that they need to involve everyone and they need to treat everyone the same and fairly. So they decide to appoint really respected and spirit-filled people to make sure that their church is being equal and intentional in welcoming everyone. When we gather, it's really tempting to gather the people who are similar to us, the ones that it's really easy to be around, who they like the same football team and they like the same TV shows, whether it's random detectives that I've not heard of, maybe I'll look that one up, or it's the sewing bee, which I've even got Phil into, or the Bake Off, which means everyone bakes, yay. People who are easy are great, but that's not actually who we're called to be in community with. We're called to be in community with a range of people, and that's the model that Jesus gave us, and what we see increasing instead of decreasing in Acts. As they lose Jesus, they go out to more people. When they've selected their 7 men who are well respected and full of wisdom, Stephen is one of them. And what happens to Stephen really soon after that is that he is killed by the Jewish leaders who don't like that the church is growing and threatening them. Once he has been martyred, the church scatters, and they scatter to Judea, but they scatter also to Samaria, which is where Jesus has had his unlikely hero of the Good Samaritan, and where he's spoken to the woman at the well, who is shocked that someone Jewish is talking to her. And then when the disciples come back, they're surprised that Jesus is talking to her. They're not the obvious place to go, but the church goes to Samaria as soon as it starts to have persecution. Later in Acts 10:11, we have Peter has a vision of the sheet being lowered down in front of him. And the sheet on it has all of the unclean animals that the Jews were not allowed to eat, that they weren't allowed to be around. They wouldn't have had like pig farms particularly because they weren't doing anything with pigs. So there's pigs, there's the seafood they're not allowed to eat. It's all there. And God tells Peter, go and eat. He tells him to do the thing, to mix with the thing that he shouldn't be mixing with if he's being a good Jew and following the Jewish laws. This instruction, this revelation, comes just before Peter is then invited to the house of a Roman centurion who is very much not the friend, not the easy ally to be with. He's a Gentile and he's part of the occupying forces. This is someone in the Ukraine inviting a Russian soldier into their home and talking to them and being with them. It's not just frowned upon in Jewish culture. When Peter arrives, he says, you know it's against our laws. I shouldn't be here. The church is being instructed to be welcoming to people in this massively countercultural way. It shouldn't look like what the world around it looks like. We're called to gather everyone. And Peter's explanation to the others in Acts 11, when he is explaining why he felt that was okay to baptize people into the churches, the Holy Spirit came. The Holy Spirit came on them, so who am I to stop that? How can we say no? God is clearly in the business of bringing in all types of people. So when we gather, we need to gather everyone, and if we don't gather everyone, we're not doing it right. So we have this repeated message. The Holy Spirit is teaching Peter, and meanwhile, the church have scattered also to Antioch. They've started to preach to the Gentiles there. And Barnabas is sent out to investigate what's going on. Barnabas, who later pairs with Saul, or Paul. The Holy Spirit is doing something with Peter and the Roman centurion. At the same time, he's doing it elsewhere and showing people this is what we need to be moving to. This is where the way we're going. We're gathering all people together. I'm going to skip that one. So, like today, like when we go home after the morning meeting, we won't all be together, and it's not necessarily easy to be popping in each other's houses. We don't live in the same confined space as people used to in the same way. We have cars. They're great, but they do separate us a lot. Jesus sent the disciples out in pairs, He sent the 72 out in pairs. We see Paul and Barnabas go out in a pair, and then later when they have a disagreement, they split into 2 more pairs. They're not going alone ever. I don't think that most of us are called to travel to different towns or countries to preach the gospel in the same way as they were, but we are called to the football games. We're called to the park run, to the craft groups, to the choirs, wherever we meet. That's that third place, our place to be social. We're called to that place. And I encourage you that maybe you've got an activity that someone else in the church could come with you to, and that could be a space of gathering more people to God. We can be intentional about all of the places that we're going to, and about praying for God's guidance and for opportunities in those spaces to spread the good news and to be in the different places really purposefully. We're very able to gather people with similar interests in the church and to go together, to go to another place to enjoy ourselves, and also to share the good news, to invite others into what we're doing as well. So to set up groups like the craft group that Maureen and Kate had. We have said about Paul and Barnabas travelling off together in a pair. When they were out and around, they found people that didn't like them. I know it's a surprise. They didn't like the change, they didn't like the new idea, and although they were received really well in some places, one place even decided that they were going to sacrifice to Paul and to Barnabas because they had done miracles in God's name. They were also followed by people who didn't want them to be preaching, and at one point Paul was stoned and left for dead. So the next thing that he and Barnabas do in the story is they sail to Antioch, where they had been committed to the grace of God for the work that they had now completed. And on arriving there, they gathered the church together. So they'd been out in a pair, and then they gathered the church together. They reported all that they'd done, all that God had done, and how he had opened a door to faith for the Gentiles. So again, welcoming everyone. And they stayed there for a long time with the disciples. I think they needed that. They needed that rest, but they were going to get that rest in a place of gathering with other community members, not by just disappearing off on their own and kind of laying low for a while or not talking to people. They purposefully seek out a community that can be a place of refuge for them, and they encouraged the believers there, and I think they were in turn encouraged to be able to go out again. So that's my next point. We need to encourage people. We need to gather in order to encourage. In Hebrews 10, it tells us that we should hold unswervingly to the hope that we profess. For he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more so as you see the day approaching. So we're called to gather, but we're called to gather in order to encourage each other. We encourage each other to love and to good deeds. The next verse then starts to talk about avoiding sin and standing firm in persecution and suffering. And then obviously we have Hebrews 11, which is all about the heroes of faith and thinking about the community that we have historically. We have a community that's gone before, the crowd of witnesses that is talked about elsewhere. So we need to be together in order to encourage one another. It's not an optional add-in for Christians. I can read my Bible at home on my own, or I can go to church. It's the both. We need others around us to encourage us. It's popular, I knew I wouldn't be able to say that one. It's often accepted that we become like people we spend time with, and we know all the potential power of peer pressure. We understand how negative it can be, but it can also be positive. We can use it to draw people up and to build people up. The more that we spend time with God, the more we become like God. The more we spend time with the community of God, the more we become like the community of God. We pull each other up together. So as we spend time with people who are being made more like God, we ourselves become more like God. And if we don't do that, we're giving ourselves a massive disservice. We're hurting ourselves. Our strapline as a church is 3 words. It's encounter, encourage, extend. We want to encounter God together. We want to encourage one another, and we want to extend the knowledge of the gospel of Jesus and his good news. That's our commission, to go and make disciples. And that means, yes, we want to see people make a decision to follow Christ, but also we want to not leave them just having made that decision. We want to teach them, to train them, to encourage them. That's a process that doesn't stop. We will never stop learning. I did Bible college years ago, and I'm still learning. It doesn't stop just because I completed a course and I got a piece of paper that said I'd completed a course. It carries on. We all need to encourage each other. That encouragement might look, it's that one. Encouragement might look like, yes, that did really well. I've had great encouragement every time I've spoken before, which I need because I'm not confident at it. That's a really obvious encouragement. Sometimes it's great to see you today. Sometimes it's Dorothy's really smiling face when she's at the back of church. Or it's Maureen putting an arm around me because I clearly had a bit of a tough one getting in, but I need it. Or it's just seeing Mark and Kath, who are out again faithfully with the children because they're faithfully coming and faithfully serving month on month on month on month. There's different ways of encouraging one another. Sometimes it's really deep, and it's the sharing of the personal stuff and the deep conversations. But that's not the encouragement that we get from everyone, that's the specific few. But we need everyone there. Sometimes it's just knowing that the person there. There's the technique called body doubling that you hear a lot about if your social media feed is for some reason full of ADHD at the moment. Body doubling is the idea that you do something at the same time as someone else, and just having that person there is really helpful. And so there's hundreds of cleaning videos on YouTube that are just there so that you can put on a person cleaning on a screen, and that apparently helps other people to carry on cleaning themselves. They're doing it at the same time as someone else, even if it's virtual and not the same time, actually. Apparently that helps. But that idea of body doubling, I think, continues. For me, recently I had a conversation with someone who was like, I've just started to try, not very well, to do this spiritual practice, specific one. And I was like, me too. It was really hard. Like, I've been thinking about it for a while, didn't really want to. Heard a talk where someone was like, you can do it in an imperfect way. It doesn't have to be all of everything, just do something. And then I've tried a couple of times, actually, since that conversation, knowing that she is also doing it, also trying. It's been so much more easy for me to try regularly to do that as well, because I'm like, I don't really want to do it. But I also know that Carol doesn't really want to do it, and Carol is trying. She's in a different town. It's 40 minutes away. I don't know what she's doing. We've had one conversation, but I know she's trying, and therefore it's a bit easier for me to try because I'm not alone in it. We need to have other people showing us that it can be possible, even if it's hard, showing us maybe they're not doing it perfectly, but having that idea that someone is doing it with us, we can't have if we're not gathering and if we're not encouraging one another. A healthy spiritual community helps us to grow good habits and to shape us to be more than we are on our own. It encourages us to be the person that God made us to be. But the reality is, if we don't have a strong community around us, we can be really easily swayed. The people in Lystra and Derby who stoned Paul, they'd been for it. They'd been like, yes, you've done miracles, you're amazing, we're going to worship you. And then someone else comes in and they're like, oh no, we're going to stone you. There's a big difference there. They were really easily swayed because they didn't have a strong community. They didn't have a strong backbone of what they were believing and what they were doing. We need to make sure that we've got really good influences around us to make sure that we're doing the right things. We can easily let our friends and acquaintances sway us into the small things like watching all of the TV or having the rubbish things on our media feeds or prioritizing things that maybe we shouldn't prioritizing a better car, a bigger house, more holidays, more expensive holidays, the me time that you need just for yourself on your own, the things that they're not intrinsically bad, but they're not actually going for God either. The things that in the Screw Tape letters, the master demon is teaching the younger demon how to pull someone away from God, and it's all the little things. He talks about twiddling his thumbs or staring at a dead fire in a cold room for long periods. It's not things that are on their own bad. It's things that are on their own not good and not going for God. And that's, I think, the slope that we can find ourselves on quite regularly if we don't have around us a community that encourages us to be spending time on God and to be spending time like building ourselves up and building each other up. And the last point that I had was that we, as a fellowship of believers, should be devoted to breaking bread in prayer. They talk about, again back in Acts, breaking of bread in prayer. Everyone who was filled with awe at the signs of wonders performed by the apostles, they were together and they had everything in common, which is going to be largely food because they didn't have all the clutter we have in our houses now. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favour of all people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. The church in Antioch, when they heard about a famine in Jerusalem, sent food over. Just from a prophetic word that they had had, there's going to be a famine, they sent food. And that's a massive thing. They sent like food money, they sent people on this 3-week by road journey, massive deal. But actually a lot of the sharing that we need to do doesn't need to be that big to make a big difference. We have the eating together in each other's homes, the breaking bread. They were meeting in public, so they're probably doing all of the things with people around them knowing it's not a quiet, hidden thing. And we know that they're sharing with the needy in their community, with the widows who are set up in Act 6 with the right balance of things. In our culture, it can be quite common to feel like we need to do everything really amazingly. We need to have the 3-course meal. We need to have the house perfectly tidy. We need to, just have everything sorted out and perfect before we can invite anyone over. But I don't think that's what they were doing. I think that it was, hi, come back for food with me. Like, I've met you in the temple courts, why don't you come over and have dinner? It would be unthinkable to have someone in their house without having eaten together. They're doing life together. And it doesn't need to be extravagant, it just needs to be life together. Sorry, I'm trying to go quicker because I know I spent too long on it. So they are doing that regularly. I think we need to do that more. We recently got invited to someone's house, I'm not going to say names, and they're like, I want to invite people over for a barbecue. But we're not sure if we can because we don't have a barbecue and we don't have patio, we don't have any garden furniture. So we're not sure if we should. And I wasn't in the conversation, Phil was in the conversation, and Phil said to me this later, I was like, oh, we've got a barbecue we can take and we've got picnic blankets, it's fine. It doesn't need to be perfect, it needs to be what it is, and it needs to be welcoming and gathering people. It doesn't need to be a 3-course meal, it doesn't need to be a barbecue's very little. It doesn't need to be a big gas barbecue, and it doesn't need to be a whole array of food. It needs to be, come and eat with me. I listen to John Mark Comer quite a lot, and he has a point that he's made quite regularly. I probably have heard it more because I don't listen to it week by week. I listen to it in binge chunks. But what he will say is, you are eating 3 times a day anyway, so you might as well invite someone else to eat with you because you're cooking, you're eating, it's time you're spending on something. Just use that time to be with other people. Doesn't need to be the best silverware. We don't even have silverware. We have utensils, cutlery. That's what we have. It's just a welcome. It's just come. It's just a share. Let's do it, and let's be a bit messy together. Let's spend that time together, not knowing whether it's a party or an event or just be at our house. Let's just do it. We're going to share community together in just a minute. Communion, both. I grew up in a Church of England church, and the liturgy around communion that I grew up hearing always was that we needed to repent first, obviously, and we repented to say sorry for the bad things that we had done and for the good things that we had left undone. And I think regularly in community, it's not the bad things that we've done, it's the good things we've left undone that we need to be repenting of, that we need to turn away from. We can get into really unhelpful habits of not doing things because there's all these things. We're too far away. Our house is a mess. People won't want to travel that far. We can get into mindsets that are really unhelpful and they hurt other people just by omission, by the good things that we leave undone. So before we do communion, I'd like to encourage you to spend time, as on the thing, just thinking, if you know you've ignored the quiet voice for God prompting you to be gathering, encouraging, welcoming, sharing, whatever, now is the right time to change. Now is always the right time to change and turn towards God, even if it's not now. Which means that we face a new direction, we change our actions and our habits. It's not just sorry, as we get in our house a lot. It's a change of heart and a change of direction. And we change back to the course that Jesus taught us. And then once we've done that personally, I'd like to encourage you to think about your piece of paper, what you said an ideal community would be like. And think about maybe on your own, maybe in pairs, maybe in groups. I don't mind, be community. Think about what you can do to make something on that paper happen, because other people can't do that for you. You need to be involved. So once you've done number one, I'd encourage you to come. We've got some bread, we've got some wine, there's some gluten-free and some blackcurrant as well if you don't want it. Come, take communion, take it back to a group if you want, or have it on your own. And then be thinking, how can I change what I do to make community better? Because community is full of messy people and imperfect people, and it's just that choice of what we do that will make the difference.